Well, my body lies over the ocean. My body lies over the sea. Ooh, my body lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my body to me. Bring back.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the Scott Arizala Show from camphacker.org. My name is Travis Allison. Today we're going to be talking with Scott about bullying. Hey Scott, how's it going?
Thanks. Thanks Travis for hosting, and hi everybody, my name is Scott Arizala. I'm a summer camp consultant and trainer. Travis approached me a couple of months back saying, hey, let's do a show together, and I thought it was a great opportunity to get together, not only with Travis, but to get out some ideas around summer camp and kind of what we're doing with kids.
So Scott, we should dig into the topic today. You wanted to talk about bullying and teasing.
Yeah, I think it's something that we're all struggling with. It's something that has been really sort of prominent in a lot of youth development recently, maybe last 5 years. It's obviously sort of exploded as far as some new forums for bullying like Facebook and some online space. Anyways, I thought it would be an interesting opportunity to talk about it here. I was thinking about this particular segment and kind of how I wanted to start it. And I wanted to start by telling you all a quick story about somebody I worked with who was sort of the classic bully. I mean, he was physically intimidating. He didn't use that necessarily as much as maybe some of the social pieces of bullying. He laughed a lot at people. He sort of snickered and was that sort of too cool for school when other kids and staff were participating in things. He was on a lot of levels. It felt like he was mean-spirited. He even went so far as to sort of manipulate it socially, where when there were adults in the room, he would know how to sort of turn it on and turn it off. To me, it was a classic bullying situation, and of course, when I say classic, I'm not referring to what I think some of our cultural myths are around classic bullying, the sort of big guy who doesn't have a whole lot of social skills, who's sort of using that sort of physical intimidation, to get people's lunch money. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm saying that is maybe not as classic, and I think that a lot of those ideas are sort of built into a myth behind bullying. The reason why I wanted to talk about this particular person is because he was actually a staff member of mine, not a camper. And upon that description that I just gave all of you, a lot of folks in youth development are sort of closing their eyes thinking, oh yeah, I know that kid as well. The reason why I wanted to start this episode talking about a staff member is because I think it highlights the thing that we're not talking about in youth development. And this really almost aggravates me to a point where we talk about, a lot of times we're talking about bullying and teasing as sort of this socially inept strategy. This when kids don't have appropriate or better skills, social skills, they sort of revert to bullying. And I wanted to start with this particular person and thinking about it in terms of, this was an adult. To really, in my opinion, blow that sort of myth out of the water. I just don't believe that. In fact, the thing I get most aggravated about when we're talking about bullying in sort of our professional circles, I get aggravated that we don't talk about the truth behind bullying, which is the simple fact that people bully because it works. It gets them some of what they are looking for. I'm going to sort of make the case today, and I'll draw out a diagram for you that I've used when training a lot of staff around bullying. I'm going to make the case that bullying is actually not only a sort of normative behavior. I'm not saying healthy or appropriate or okay. I'm saying a normative behavior, and the reason why people do it is because it works as a social strategy to sort of connect them into a group, to create connections. Now, having said that, I want to be very clear, Travis, what I'm talking about. I'm not saying that it's okay. I'm not saying that we should not pay attention to it or not work with victims of bullying, not work with the bystanders. We'll kind of talk about all of that. I just want to be very real on the forefront of this discussion, which is to say, I believe I believe kids and adults bully and they tease and they pick on each other because it works at its core.
So, Scott, the thing is then that we need to replace bullying with something, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that's, I think, where we get into the strategies around, okay, so what can we do then to exactly what you're saying, Travis, replace the bullying behavior? Because, of course, it's not okay. It's not okay to physically, emotionally, mentally sort of be mean to each other, pick on each other, all that kind of stuff. So, sort of how do we do this? How do we replace, that behavior? If you want, Travis, I can jump right into sort of the behavior sort of model that I was going to share with everybody, and then that might generate some more sort of discussion around, okay, so what do we do about it?
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
All right, let's do that. Let me sort of pull this in to the frame here. This is a lot of times what I do when I'm teaching. What's that?
Awesome props.
Yeah, you like that, right? This is oftentimes what I do when I'm teaching at a camp or any other youth development situation, like how do I teach, sort of the concept of bullying. For all of the sort of youth development professionals, camp professionals, a lot of what I'm about to show here isn't really that necessarily new. And it's also sort of a bare bones model. We could all come up with a lot of different things that would go on this sort of behavior cycle that I'm about to share. But I think it's at its core, I think this is can get us into a bit of an explanation around why some bullying behavior happens, and then also we can start a good discussion around two different pieces when it comes to bullying and bullying behavior. Prevention, how can we prevent some of that stuff from even happening? And then, of course, intervention. What do we do when it does happen, both for victims, for bullies, as well as for bystanders? So for those of you who can see this, here's my little person right in the middle. I talk about this in three stages. This is, for the most part, what I'm about to draw is what I call sort of a understanding behavior. So the first sort of stage in the cycle is a simple question that I believe most kids, most adults, almost everybody sort of ask when they get themselves into any kind of social situation, which is almost every situation. They kind of ask this question, am I cool? Now, Travis, you and I both know that adults don't kind of walk around asking that kind of question or sort of even approaching it kind of like that. Although I'm willing to argue that how adults say it, things like, creating community or finding a sense of belonging or networking, those are all adult ways of saying, am I cool, right? We kind of come into a social situation and we map it out. Who knows who's related to who looks like they know what they're doing. How do I fit into this social landscape? The second piece of the cycle is what I have called freakouts. All right, this is another way to say freakouts is just having insecurity, right? Everybody has some insecurities when you get into any situation. Of course, at camp, whether it's resident camp or day camp, a lot of the freakouts and insecurities, we kind of know what's coming at us with kids, right? I mean, they're concerned about having friends. They're concerned about where they're going to, if it's a resident camp, where they're going to sleep, where they're going to eat. They're concerned about how they look. They're concerned about their clothes. I mean, all these kinds of things we know kids have some insecurities about or they freak out about. There's some things that we don't know when kids come to us. We don't know their family history. We don't know how they did in school this year. We don't know if their parents decided to take a medication vacation when they come to camp and take them off some of the meds that they're on during the school. We don't know some of those things. We may, but we don't know some of them. And kids can have insecurities about all that kind of stuff. The last step or the last stage in this cycle is what I call action. Another way to say this is coping strategies. Now here's where the cycle starts to make sense, okay? So here's what we do. We kind of come into a situation and sort of map out the social landscape and ask if I'm cool. How do I fit in? We all, of course, have insecurities. Some we know, some we don't know. And then, because of those insecurities, we do something about it. We have coping strategies. There's some sort of action involved in what we're doing. So, what does this mean? What does this look like? This could be some really healthy ones, right? Coping strategies and actions could be stuff like, well, a kid sits down with a group of kids that they don't know, and they, ask them questions. They say, "Hi, I'm Scott. What's your name?" Maybe they try to engage kids in an activity that they're really good at. Maybe they're really good at basketball, so they try to get other kids involved. This could also be unhealthy. This is where bullying fits in. What I'm trying to make the case, Travis, is I'm trying to say that almost all behavior that we see from kids and from adults, frankly, fits into this sort of behavior cycle, all right? Bullying, in my opinion, is no different. It fits right in. A bully asks these same questions about how they fit in. A bully has just as many insecurities, if not more, than anybody else. And a bully seeks action, seeks some sort of coping strategies. The argument I'm trying to make is that bullying is actually a coping strategy. It's not a healthy one or a normal, or a sort of a, not normal. It's not a healthy or adaptive one, but it is a coping strategy. Here's where I try to make the case that bullying actually works. So, what happens when a kid bullies another kid or a group of kids? Well, of course, they create a social connection. They're actually answering this question. And Dr. Chris Thurber talks about this sort of essential bullying paradoxes. And one of the paradoxes that I find fascinating is this sort of paradox between how kids feel when there's a bully and how they act. How do they behave? And of course, how they feel about the bully is they don't like the bully. He's a jerk, or she's really mean, and they want to separate themselves. But how do they act? They laugh at the jokes, they pull them in, they invite them into the conversations. Why? Because they don't want to be the next one. So while it's not healthy and the best social connections we can make, this is why I'm trying to argue that bullying actually works. So what do we do about it is the obvious question.
3 Adventures International Camp Staff. 3 things you should know about 3 Adventures. 1. Our owners are all former camp directors. 2. We're a high-quality company that's easy on your budget. 3. Background checks. Our international camp staff come from all over the world, and every one of them has had a background check. No exceptions, no excuses. 3adventures.com, the site to get great camps connected with great staff.
Yeah, and how do we catch those who first turn to bullying as their answer, and how do we get them to go to something else as their action?
Absolutely. And, I think the reality, especially if we're going to talk specifically about camp, I think the reality is we do a lot already that falls into this, that is in what I would call prevention mode. We just don't necessarily think about it like that. I mean, what are some of the things that we're asking camp counselors to do in the first, 3 hours that kids are at camp? I mean, we're having them do get to know you games, take them on big tours of camp, keeping kids really active, taking a frisbee out and throwing it, whatever the case is, doing icebreakers, all those kinds of things. Why? Well, you ask a typical camp counselor, and most might say something like, because it's time fillers, right? Like, we're waiting for our whole group to come, so we've got to be able to do something with them or whatever. Those things are great time fillers. I don't want to, diss any camp counselor who uses them as time fillers. I want to sort of broaden the understanding behind what we're doing. We're answering some really essential questions in this part of the behavior model, right? Get to know you games. What really is that? That's creating connections. Right? Giving a tour, talking about previewing the schedule, giving kids a schedule, talking about what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or tonight at evening activity for resident camps. These are all things that ground us in knowing more about the culture, knowing more about what's going on. This will allow for some prevention strategies. I just want us to think about it in those terms. So it's a really long way of sort of responding to your statement, Travis, but what I think we need to do is we need to reframe some of the things that we're already doing at camp with a particular eye on how are we creating connections, really good, healthy connections for young people, because I think that in and of itself will prevent some bullying behavior from happening.
What I like from that, Scott, is that it's action oriented and it gives kids something to do. And I've always found that bored kids bully, and without enough stuff for them to do, that's when they get into acting out these things. And if they don't get caught up in bullying if they have something that they're doing. So if you start with games and a tour, then those kids don't have time quiet in a cabin to start to sort of establish a social hierarchy. You are creating an evenness by taking them into games. And this allows them to establish a better and different relationship within the structure of the cabin group.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, to your point, Travis, right? Bored, what does that do? I mean, that creates room, psychological, emotional, maybe even physical room for some insecurity, right? Like I said, we're never going to prevent insecurity from happening. But as Travis was talking about, keeping kids engaged and distracted, one of your number one number one strategies sort of for preventing some just negative behavior just sort of in general from happening, but bullying, I think, in specific. So there's some ideas around prevention. I think this also can lead to some ideas around intervention. What do we do when bullying actually occurs? And there's a lot of different ideas out there. And I'm not necessarily the expert, right? I would push everybody in the direction of Dr. Joel Haber, respectyou.com. He is one of the best and brightest out there as far as bullying is concerned, and there are a lot of strategies. What I wanted to try to do is sort of break down what was going on underneath, because the reality is especially in a 20-minute episode on this show, or really any time, I don't care how long I have with staff, I can't give you necessarily the answers to, here's the sort of strategy that's always going to work with every kid that bullies. I mean, if you've ever worked with kids before, you know that never works. I mean, homesickness is another great example, right? I mean, nothing ever works for every kid. Well, bullying, any behavior problem is the same way. So what I hope to do is try to find a way to teach people how to see these situations in their sort of unique context, and then move to intervene. So what would we do in sort of a generic case? Well, we know this is happening. We know they're trying to create connections and figure out if they're cool. We know this is happening. So one of the things that we could do to intervene is to try and figure out, well, what is it that this particular individual or group of individuals are insecure about? What are they freaking out about? Right? How do you do that? Well, you employ all those great camp counselor strategies of really getting to know kids. Right, really creating honest, trusting relationships with kids. Right, you start to see this more clearly. Right, and if we can frame it as a coping strategy or as action, then we can sort of break this cycle and say, you know what, this thing isn't so good. This isn't getting what you want. I know sort of what's going on here. This isn't getting what you want. How can I teach to this skill now? And say, how can I connect you in a different way? Is it that we've got 3 pairs of best friends who all grew up together? I came in as the new guy, and so my strategy was to sort of pick on everybody, make fun of all their relationships. Okay, how can I, as then the counselor, help this particular young person connect in different ways by teaching some different kinds of strategies or action?
Well, that's great, Scott. I think that gives people a plan for working on for training with their staff.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And I think when we are starting to think about training and whatnot, I think there's sort of 2 pieces that I want people to walk away with. One, of course, is to use an idea like this and to sort of try to break down sort of what's underneath the behavior that we're seeing. But the second thing is, I think with a lot of this is it's because of the unique nature of what we're talking about. I think it's a lot about practice. I mean, I think bullying and teasing and what we can do as far as training, I mean, that's sort of a ripe environment to do things like scenarios and role playing, and to have some really great dynamic training that you can then sort of really sort of break down the underlying principles and use them in lots of different ways. I respect that a lot of you listening don't have days and days and days to do staff training, and I realize that an hour or 2 hours that you've carved out of your week, that's precious time, and as far as we're all concerned at Camp, man, 2 hours, that's a lot of time to be spent. I just think we need to really think clearly about what's going on. I mean, the fact is that almost everybody anecdotally will tell you that the incidence of bullying is on the rise. I actually disagree with that. I just think that we have different ways to bully now that's different. But it doesn't really matter whether I agree with it or not. All of us as a culture, and specifically as youth development professionals, need to really think clearly about how we're going to handle a lot of bullying and teasing going on in our programs.
I really want to thank Scott for hosting and for giving us some great information. If you're interested in more of these kinds of shows and the rest of Scott's shows, then please check out camphacker.org, and you can find more information about all of that there. Scott, thank you, and it was a great show.
All right, thanks so much, Travis. I really appreciate you hosting. My name is Scott Arizala. For more information on me and what I do, please check me out at thecampcounselor.com. And thanks so much for watching. We'll see you all next time.
Well, my